Hi everyone, my name's Jen. I'm an author and a book reviewer, and I already know this video is not going to go to plan. It is the 10th of May. I think it's the 10th of May. Right, the International Booker winner this year is announced in about 10 days. And 2 months ago, I got really excited and I thought, I'm going to read the entire long list. And it was, I think, the same week that the Women's Prize Longlist was announced. And I did read all of the Women's Prize Longlist this year. I will link that vlog in the description box down below. But essentially, my eyes were bigger than my stomach. And when the International Booker list came out, I thought, oh. And yeah, I purchased a few. I requested a copy, a couple of copies to review. And I'm going to read half of the International Booker Longlist in the next 10 days. I thought I had loads of time. Time just slipped away. So we're going to see how much I can get done before the winner is announced. I was going to say, let's normalise reading fewer books, because on BookTube we can romanticising reading all the things, but I appreciate that this is still quite a few books. It's all relative. I am always excited by the International Booker, but I was particularly excited by it this year because the head judge is the lovely Max Porter, whose books I adore, and he's also a pal of mine. We don't always align when it comes to book tastes, but I would argue that we agree on the fundamentals. We have core loves, and that's what's important. So for instance, he introduced me to Sarah Moss when he was her editor, and I love Sarah, and I introduced him to the Frida Klein series by Nikki French, which, as you know, is basically my whole heart and soul, and he also loves those. So we've got the bases covered. So I'm hoping that within these books that I have selected from this year's longlist are going to be ones that I fall in love with too. I have purchased or requested for review 6 out of the 13 longlisted books. I actually purchased 7, but one of them, the name of which escapes me, I will put the cover here, has been delayed and delayed and delayed. I imagine it is reprinting. I know small presses can get completely overwhelmed by prizes like this, but this book now isn't going to arrive with me until July, I think, so it won't be part of this video. There were 2 books from this year's long list that were on my radar anyway, and I had already requested copies of for review before the long list was announced. So let's start with those. So we have got Under the Eye of the Big Bird by Hiromi Kawakami, which is translated from the Japanese by Asa Yanida. This is a dystopian book. I'm not going to go into plot in this section because I'm going to read and talk about all the books in the video and we don't need to repeat ourselves. And then I had requested Hunchback by Saou Ichikawa, which is translated from the Japanese by Polly Barton. This is an Own Voices disability book, which is very exciting. In fact, there are 2 disabled authors that I'm aware of on this year's long list, and I have both of their books here. Then I requested Perfection by Vincenzo Latronico, which is translated from the Italian by Sophie Hughes. This one I think is set in Berlin. Then I bought the other 3. We have Anne Says A Leopard Skin Hat, translated from the French by Mark Hutchinson. Then we've got Reservoir Bitches by Dahlia de la Cerda, who is the other disabled author I was talking about. If you're new, I'm also disabled, which is why I am harping on about disability representation, and this is translated from the Spanish by Heather Cleary and Julia Sanchez. And then finally I purchased the book of Disappearance by Ibtisam Azem, which is translated from the Arabic by Sinem Antoun. This is a Palestinian novel. So out of these 6 books, 3 of them are currently on the short list. These 3, Perfection, Under the Eye of the Big Bird, and A Leopard Skin Hat. But I want to read all 6 of these and chat about them in this video over the course of the next week, fingers crossed. Hopefully, if you are new here, I have a 1-year-old. I am juggling work and childcare. She is currently having a nap. When she wakes up, we're going to go to the woods because the bluebells are out and they are beautiful. So I will insert some footage of the bluebells here, and then I will check back in with you when I have things to say after I have read some words, because that's how this works. Okay, I'll see you soon. I have a feeling that I'm wearing exactly the same thing as I was wearing in the last clip, but it's several days later and these have been washed, but I know I'm looking very dishevelled. There may be yogurt in my hair. If there is, let's ignore it. It's the evening, but it's still light. Things continue to not go to plan. This week, Mr. M has sprained his ankle, which means that he isn't really able to help out when he's not at work and he's working from home. And also my daughter has decided to start walking, which is kind of ironic that she's doing that the week that Mr. M can't walk around. And also she's gone down to one nap, which means I am trying to figure out how I fit everything into the day now. We have more time when she's awake so we can go further afield and do things, but less time when she's asleep. And there are not enough hours in the day. But I am here to talk to you about books. Oh, there was one thing I wanted to mention in the last clip and forgot. So just while I remember now, because it will exit my brain and I will forget again. In case this is of interest to anybody, I just thought I would shout out the National Garden Scheme, which I know is in England and Scotland, maybe in other places too. Give it a Google, see if it's near you. But essentially people can open their gardens to the public. Really keen gardeners, people have not necessarily really big gardens, some of them are tiny, but they're just laid out really beautifully and a lot of thought has gone into them, and you can pay money to go into these gardens when they're open and the money goes to charity, and they often sell tea and cake, and we have been doing that, not recently because Mr. M, as I said, sprained his ankle so he can't really walk around, but we were doing that as a family and it just felt very wholesome and I really enjoyed it, so I thought I would recommend it. Lots of places have their gardens open, so I will link it in the description box down below. I have read 3 books. I have read Hunchback, Reservoir Bitches and A Leopard Skin Hat. I will talk to you about the first 2 I think in this clip because I'm really trying not to yawn and failing clearly. So let's talk about 2 books now and then we can talk about the other one tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow. So first off, I read Hunchback by Saou Ichikawa, which is translated from the Japanese by Polly Barton. This is following Shaka, who is a disabled woman who has a disability very similar to the author's, living in a home that was set up by her parents but is also open to other residents. She's very privileged in the sense that she has a lot of family money, but not privileged in other ways, and we follow her day-to-day life, the mechanical things that she has to do in order to perform tasks that non-disabled people might not have to think about in the same way, the machines that are helping to keep her alive. And I loved how this book followed and discussed crip time. Thought that was great. Her narrative is sandwiched between 2 other narratives which can be interpreted in different ways. The first one, like the first scene that we open with, is a piece of fiction that Shaka has written because she writes erotic fiction and she also does a bit of journalism on the side. And the erotic fiction that she writes is not particularly good, and it really throws you into this and you're thinking, wait, what am I reading? How has this been longlisted for the International Booker? And then you realise, oh wait, this is a character writing another character. Possibly, and I say possibly because ... you can read this book in several different ways. Shaka is a very provocative person. She really wants to get a reaction out of people, not necessarily in her day-to-day life because she doesn't seem to love confrontation with people, but by putting things out into the world on the internet with little to no repercussions, and the people in her real life don't know about her internet persona. So she has a Twitter account where she says things like, I would like to be resurrected as a sex worker in another life. I would like to get pregnant just so I can have an abortion. Like, she really just wants to make the world turn their head and look at her in a certain way, in a different way to the way that they normally do. It's funny though, because I have seen some people say that this book is shocking not only in the provocative nature of Shaka, but because it presents disability and sexuality in the same breath, on the same page, and how for some people that isn't something they've thought of before, which I think Shaka would find quite amusing, because I think that's kind of the point of this book, that so often disabled people are desexualized, and yes, it was funny to see some people outing themselves in reviews of this book, especially also in the discussion of ableism in publishing, which is also something that's talked about in here, how not all books are accessible for everyone, how heavy books, for instance, are not accessible to Shaka, how some books are not available as audiobooks, and that is ableist, etc, etc. And none of those things were shocking to me or things I hadn't thought about before, not just because I guess I'm a disabled person myself, but because I work in the publishing industry and that's something that I am very aware of. But I'm very pleased to see it being discussed in a book that has a big reach and is causing other people to think about it and talk about it, because that's very important. Shaka's very provocative tweet of "I want to get pregnant just so I can have an abortion" is a gateway into a discussion on eugenics when it comes to disability, which is rife and has been historically and still is now. It just appears in a slightly different guise. But the sterilisation of disabled people historically, also abortion being presented to disabled people as the go-to option if they discover that they are also pregnant with a disabled child, that also being the case for non-disabled people who perhaps discover certain conditions in scans, etc. When I was going through IVF, abortion was presented to me as something that I should choose because it was the cheapest option for the medical community. I say that as a hypothetical, like if I was pregnant with a disabled child, like that should be something that I do because it is the cheapest option for them. And if you've read my book, please do not touch this exhibit. You will know that I talked about all of that in there, and it was very distressing and gross. So again, I was pleased to see that this was something that was being discussed in this book too. The plot point that propels the narrative in this is that one of the male carers comes to Shaka one day and essentially tries to blackmail her. He declares that he is a beta male and that he is, I guess, possibly an incel, and that he is a minority just like her because he is a beta male, and he therefore identifies with her somehow. Anyway, he tries to blackmail her and she then thinks how she can manipulate this situation so it's something in her favour. The way that he talks to her makes her think of herself as the Mona Lisa, and she says, "I couldn't conflate my feelings with those of Tomoko Yonizu, who took out on the Mona Lisa the distress of a heart that was being ripped in two by the opposing forces of disability and able-bodiedness. I had my own reasons for wanting to vandalise that painting, though. I hated museums and libraries and any kind of historic building. I loathed old things whose flawless, polished form had been impeccably preserved. I hated things which endured without breaking, which accrued value through ageing. The longer I lived, the more my body collapsed into an ever more aberrant state. It wasn't collapsing into death, rather it collapsed so as to live, collapsed as testament to all the time I'd withstood. That made my disability decisively different from the fatal diseases or decrepitude of ageing which the able-bodied might experience, where there was a variation only in timing. When I read a book, my spine would bend, crushing my lung, puncturing a hole in my throat. When I walked, I banged my head. To live, my body breaks." I love several things about that page. I love the nod to, if you take that image even further, her body being a book and her spine curving and breaking, because it feeds into her talking about books and accessibility and how it's awkward to hold them, like it's awkward for her to hold her own body. I really like her talking about how she hates old buildings because the things she's not saying in there, and I think is heavily implied, is that she also hates them because mostly they're inaccessible, and buildings being old is used as an excuse by organisations for why their buildings are inaccessible. Oh, we can't put in a lift. Oh no, we can't put in a ramp because it's old and we must preserve the historic nature of this place rather than make it accessible to disabled people. And I've thought so much about this image of her as the Mona Lisa. She references the Mona Lisa earlier on in the book, and then she says, or maybe I feel like the Mona Lisa because of the way this carer is speaking to me. And I think that branches off in so many different directions. So her body as a work of art, but meaning that in the way that society has decreed it's okay to stare at her, it's okay to try and interpret her, to critique her, to line up and gawp at her, because that's what her body is for. People are trying to interpret it all the time in the same way that people are trying to work out what the Mona Lisa's expression is trying to say, that it's perfectly acceptable to pose rhetorical, hypothetical questions about a disabled body, even if that person is standing right in front of you. It is perfectly okay to talk about that person as if they're not in the room at all, as if they are a silent, static image that can't talk back. As I said, Shaka's section is sandwiched between two other narratives, and the way that you read those means that you can kind of interpret the story in a completely different way, or in several different ways actually. Shaka tweets at one point, in another life I would like to be reborn as a sex worker. So you're thinking, are you reading about another possible life, a parallel universe? Or is that a nod to the fact that Shaka writing this erotic fiction is her portal to another world? Is it just getting deeper into that? Or is it that Shaka herself is fictional primarily because such a disabled character wouldn't be allowed to exist as a real person within a book because the publishing industry is so ableist? Like, she has to be fake in order to be accepted, which is obviously ultra meta and a bit ridiculous, because of course she's fictional, because this is a novel, but it does open the door to that conversation too, which I liked. It's not going to be a favourite book of mine, but I did enjoy the topics that it was attempting to explore. I did love the discussion, as I said, about the Mona Lisa, and there were certain passages that I thought worked really, really well. Overall, I think it could have been longer, could have explored a few more things, but I'm very happy that I read it, and I'm glad that it was on the International Booker Longlist this year. The other book that I've read is Reservoir Bitches by Dahlia de la Cerda, which is translated from the Spanish by Julia Sanchez and Heather Cleary. I don't have a huge amount to say about this one because I didn't particularly enjoy it. It's a series of interconnected short stories, and this is currently being turned into a TV series, and I think it's the kind of story or stories that I would prefer to see in visual form. That's how that kind of narrative works best for me, but I can see why other people would really love this. It is very easy to read, very conversational. This is all from the point of view of very justifiably angry women who want to be heard, and their voices were both very distinct in the sense that I believed in them. I believed that they were speaking directly to me, but also those voices bled together a little bit the more stories I read, not just because their circumstances were sometimes very similar, but I think their tone was also quite similar. And I think that was maybe deliberate, as in these women are singing to you or shouting at you as a chorus of voices united in their anger. So I think that worked. I mean, this book does feel like it's shouting at you, not because it is heavy-handed or anything like that, but I guess because it feels as though they are talking at you, and as I said, they are raising their voices a lot. What I loved actually was the vernacular in this, especially when we're talking about translation, because it felt as though I was reading someone speaking to me in English. The way that this book has been translated reminded me a lot of Han Kang's Human Acts, and in that there is some colloquial chat, some slang, some dialect accent, and I remember talking with Deborah Smith about her translation of this, and she said that when she was translating it, she thought she would combat that by having some of the characters have a Yorkshire accent. I thought that was so bizarre, but also quite brilliant. It's really interesting what you can do with translation in that respect. But yeah, overall didn't particularly work for me, won't be the top of my list of the 6 books that I'm reading from this list. As I said, I have also read A Leopard Skin Hat. I keep on checking what the title is. So I will talk to you about that tomorrow. I'm also reading, well, the others, and we'll get to them at some point as well. Hopefully this video will go up on Sunday. I'm still aiming for that, but yeah, I've been scrambling a little this week and my brain is tired, but I'm enjoying reading these books and talking to you about them, so I will keep doing so whenever I can. I'll see you soon. I'm back, and I don't have yogurt in my hair today, at least I don't think so, but I may have almond butter somewhere on my face, and if I do, let's pretend that I don't. Today's excellent charity shop find is this. This is Love Every Bus. Love Every is a toy subscription service and it's quite expensive, but this was in our local charity shop for £5. It's got these little coloured pegs inside that you can, I don't know, it's just very cute, very satisfying, very robust, and I do love discovering stuff like that in charity shops. So that was today's success story. All right, this evening, as the light fades, the sun I think has actually set, so let me talk to you before it gets completely dark. I want to chat about these two books. It is actually Saturday evening as I'm filming this, and I'm hoping this video will go up tomorrow. I have also finished reading Perfection, and I am part way through Under the Eye of the Big Bird, so I'll see if I can finish that tonight / tomorrow morning. If not, I will talk to you about my thoughts on what I have read so far and get this video up for you tomorrow. The reason I want to do that is because I normally upload on a Sunday if I'm uploading, and the winner is announced now on Tuesday. So I want to get this video up before the winner is announced. So anyway, let's talk about A Leopard Skin Hat. This is a novel about the loss of a friend, and I believe that the author and Serre, and I should say who it is translated by, it's translated from the French by Mark Hutchinson. I believe that the author wrote this after the death of her sister. So it's about two friends, one of whom has died. She is called Fanny, and the person who's talking about her is called the narrator. This book isn't just mourning the death of Fanny, but also mourning how we don't always know someone in their complete form, whatever that means. An example of that is here. Basically, the narrator said to himself, the idea we form of others comes solely from their relationship with ourselves. Seen through their relationship with someone else, they are necessarily slightly different, and should we catch a glimpse of them in the privacy of their own self, which is impossible without spying on them or rummaging through their papers, they are someone of whom we know strictly nothing. And lots of questions, I'm just looking at my notes because I've written down a page number, lots of questions are used in this book to highlight this unknowing. Where would she like to go at midnight? To see a waterfall she used to be fond of? To drive across the open plains? To return home? As I said, it's narrated by someone called the narrator, but they narrate it in third person, as though hiding themselves from us, creating this extra layer, as if it's not possible for us to know them either, this passing on of the baton of unknowing. Maybe it's like tongue-in-cheek highlighting the difficulty of writing a novel and knowing or not knowing your characters inside out. Or maybe the narrator is just trying to elevate themselves and give themselves more gravitas, sound more important, more knowledgeable by talking about themselves in the third person. But I also like this idea that I thought occasionally when reading it, that perhaps the narrator is a fabrication of Fanny herself, that the narrator is the voice inside Fanny's head that is narrating her life, that is her trying to understand herself better and failing. On page 51 it says, because basically it was no different to the work of writing, which Fanny realised, her awareness of this being one part of her impotent hatred. It was like telling a story. You had to be extremely focused in order to piece the elements together, to be in an almost trance-like state where forms arise and take shape that never appear directly to reason. You had to formulate a question as accurately as possible and, in the painstaking work of edification that ensued, produce the kind of answer that never states its name but foists itself on the reader as one of the truths of human existence. Like the profuse material of life to which a text gives form and meaning, the turmoil and mystery of Fanny's emotions demanded to be worked upon. She was the living example of what a narrator has to confront every hour of every day. She was a book from before the book. So trying to interpret yourself like you're a work of fiction, trying to read between the lines of what you're yourself saying to people, subtext being a subconscious. I thought tonally this book was quite repetitive, and I think that's deliberate, like someone going over the same ground over and over again to try and attribute new meaning to it. You know, thinking about all the things that we have said or wish we didn't say, things that we would like to add if we could go back in time and reenact things. But when it worked, I thought it really worked brilliantly. There's lots of run-on sentences which make the whole thing feel a bit breathless, as though it's a bit of a confessional. And when it was really, really good, the thought I kept on having when I was reading this book is, This is what a book would be like if Virginia Woolf was writing an Elizabeth Strout novel. I just couldn't escape that, because the two people in this, if they are two people, the narrator and Fanny, felt very much like Lucy Barton and Bob Burgess, and their missing and not missing, connected, not connected relationship. And I just thought that was very endearing. So yeah, I liked this, but I wasn't captivated by it the whole time, and I kept on feeling pulled out of it because I was maybe more interested in thinking about what it was doing than being completely enveloped in the story it was attempting to tell. Then the other book, dropping my notes, that I wanted to speak about in this video is the Book of Disappearance by Ibtisam Azem, and this is translated from the Arabic by Sinan Antoon. This was written in 2014, and that's the case for many of the books, actually, or well, several of the books on the long list / shortlist. Sorry, I'm sitting on the floor and it's a little bit uncomfortable because I'm not going to talk about why the floor is uncomfortable. I'm talking about why things that have been published over 10 years ago are now on this year's list. They're new translations, so it's when the translation was published that counts. So this one is 10 years old, so is the Hiromi Kawakami. Yes, it's just an interesting part of this prize, but the fact that this was written in 2014 gives extra gravity to the book itself, which I'm not sure if that's something that this book should be rewarded for, but it's just interesting to think about. I actually accidentally read this on the anniversary of the Nakba this week. This is a book where the central premise is that one day all Palestinians have disappeared and no one knows why. It is a really bold, striking concept and reminded me quite a lot actually of Exit West by Moshe Hamid, which is a magical realism book that is using, again, a very strong concept, the act of disappearing through a door and appearing somewhere else, to discuss being a refugee and migration. So when all Palestinian people disappear, the Israeli government frame this as an act of terror against them, saying surely this is a plot. First they think maybe all Palestinian people have gone on strike, and then they say no, they've gone underground and they're going to suddenly appear and attack us all, and we have no knowledge of when this is going to happen, and that's so terrifying. They play themselves as the victim, and that is what is pushed out in press releases, on TV, etc. And I think what's really strong about this book is that it shows how, as a collective, the narrative moves from, oh, we're so scared, terrible things are going to happen to us, to, oh, maybe it's fine and actually this is a blessing, and no, we don't really care where everyone has gone, this has, in quotes, solved our problem. As I said, this was written in 2014 and obviously resonates even more in the present day, and it also has a really interesting conversation with perfection, another book on the list, which I'll talk about tomorrow when I review that one. And I recently read Crooked Cross by Sally Carson, which was written in 1933, but was talking about the rise of Nazism in Germany and foreshadowing what was going to happen, but in a novel. It was basically like reading the TV show Years and Years, but set in Germany and written before the Second World War, and that eerie foreshadowing, and you knowing that as a person reading it in what is their future, is how I felt reading this book too. It just adds a whole new weight to it. From a literary perspective, and from my own personal taste when it comes to writing, there are a few too many different points of view in this. And I think that it's deliberate to have so many different points of view because it's showing how widespread and pervasive this way of thinking is, this acceptance of the disappearing of Palestinian people. But it did create a disconnect with the reader because you couldn't get close to anybody either. Weirdly, that use of multiple perspectives in a social science fiction novel, if that's what we're calling this, reminded me of how I felt about The Power by Naomi Alderman and The Kraken Wakes by John Wyndham, both of which are magical realism / sci-fi novels that use that genre to make political points. And I also ended up not loving those in their entirety because of the multiple perspectives, even though I respected what they were doing and why those perspectives were there. So yes, I really respect this and what it's doing, and I think it really packs a punch, but stylistically not my favourite from this year's list. Okay, the sun really has disappeared now. This camera is lighting up the room more than it actually is in real life. I will talk about the final 2 books in the morning, so I will see you then. Hi, it is the morning. Good morning. Mr. M is supervising breakfast, so I have 10 minutes to talk to you about these 2 books. The first of which is Perfection by Vincenzo Latronico, which is translated from the Italian by Sophie Hughes. This is a novel about a couple called Anna and Tom who live in Berlin. They are not from Berlin. They have the privilege of being called expats rather than migrants. That is how they self-identify. And we're following them romanticising their lives in this busy, bustling city that sometimes they don't feel as though they belong in the sense that they're not particularly adventurous. They wish they were, but that also makes them feel quite smug too as a cozy couple at home while everyone else is out partying and getting drunk. They'll have a taster and then they'll come back into their bubble and feel as though they have lived as much as maybe they want to do so. It opens with an Airbnb listing of their apartment and a really intricate look at all of the photos, every detail. The narrator's telling you where you should be looking so that you can peer into their lives and see how, quote, picture perfect it is. But there is a permanence to these photographs which does not translate, excuse the pun, into their everyday lives. So page 20 is a note that I have made for myself. It wasn't order they so desperately craved, but something deeper and more essential. They lived in a country whose language they didn't speak, in a job with unclear boundaries and no fixed hours or base, and which was, to a great extent, subject to the whims of their clients and social media contacts. The environment where they slept and worked, and which they themselves had chosen and shaped, was the one tangible manifestation of who they were. That apartment and those objects weren't merely a reflection of their personalities, they provided a foothold. In their eyes, proof of a grounded lifestyle which, from another perspective, that of, say, their parents' generation, appeared loose. In itself, chaos could be joyful, creative, but in that context it only seemed to signal impermanence. When I was reading this, it felt like I was reading / watching a play unfold in front of me, a silent play where the characters don't speak and they're just being controlled by this narrator who seems to be narrating what they're doing, but in some ways also seems to be instructing them to do the things that he is saying. So they're performing things at his or her whim. And perhaps I was acutely aware of that because I've just finished reading Anne Serre's book where the narrator is controlling everything or controlling what we see or don't see. And in Perfection, the narrator likes to not only describe what's happening, but sometimes critique it and isn't particularly nice towards Anna and Tom in the way maybe an older relative might insert some kind of unhelpful feedback along the lines of, if you just unsubscribe from Netflix, you would be able to afford a mortgage, that kind of thing. Anna and Tom work as freelancers. They're in an apartment which they can only live in because they rent it out to other people when they travel and can charge a large amount for that because the rent they pay is also astronomical. So they know that they are part of the problem because by using Airbnb and getting people to pay even more than they pay, they are forcing the market ever higher, but they see it as their only means to survive. As I said, they work freelance, so they are deciding what their worth is when they are responding to client inquiries and pricing their services. This is all about gaps, this book. So the gap between photographs and reality, between things and their value, between memories and what actually happened. And I think that's particularly poignant in a book that is translated, because translation is all about gaps, about closing them or making them wider, bridging things, and all of that was very fun to consider while reading. Anna and Tom are very comfortable in their lives, or they're kidding themselves that they feel very comfortable. And the way that this book is written with very long run-on sentences makes you feel very comfortable. It doesn't particularly allow for much pause. You're just being swept along with it. And it makes you feel complicit in their often naive, tumbling along way of living life, where they notice political upheaval in the background and do sometimes do things to contribute and help, but mostly see it as a background noise that is a distraction from the way they want to be seen living their lives. As the novel progresses, this undercurrent becomes louder and louder, more difficult for the characters to ignore, but they continue to try and do so and slap a filter on everything that they're doing, and it just becomes deeply uncomfortable. Anna and Tom spoke stumbling English with other non-native English speakers. They inhabited a world where everyone accepted a line of coke, where no one was a doctor or a baker or a taxi driver or a middle school teacher. They spent all their time in plant-filled apartments and cafes with excellent Wi-Fi. In the long run, it was inevitable that they would convince themselves that nothing else existed. This book is a stifled scream, and I really enjoyed reading it, and I also am partway through, I haven't managed to finish, Under the Eye of the Big Bird by Hiromi Kawakami, which is translated from the Japanese by Asa Yunida. This is very fable-like and is reminiscent of her book Record of a Night Too Brief, which is my favourite book by her. I also really enjoy her book People from My Neighbourhood, which is a collection of flash fiction. I haven't enjoyed her more popular novels such as The Nakano Thrift Shop or Strange Weather in Tokyo, but when her fiction gets extra weird, I really enjoy it. I would say this is for fans of Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. It has an element of climate fiction. It's set in a world where human DNA is fragile, and so it has been paired with animal DNA, so you get people who are part shark or are part dolphin, etc. Men are extremely rare. Children are brought up by a collective called the Mothers, and not to make this about myself, but I just couldn't stop thinking about my short story Animals in the Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night. If you have read that, you will know what I mean, because that is a dystopian world I created where love has run out, and in order to be able to love, people can buy hearts online, the hearts of animals, which they then can transplant into themselves. There's also another story in my collection about a series of plant children, which also made me think of this. The reason I'm mentioning that is because if you enjoyed that, then I think you will really enjoy what this is saying too. And I could have rushed through this maybe to finish it for this video, but I'm enjoying myself and I don't want to rush, so I will continue to read this and will report back in a wrap up, because I need to catch up with you about what I've been reading, because since I talked to you about, how long ago was it? A couple of months ago, when I did a wrap up of everything I'd read in the first few months of the year, I have read so many good things, including my favourite book of 2025 so far. So yeah, I will catch up with you about those very soon. But that brings us to the end of this particular video, where I read 6 of the International Booker Prize Longlist. I will say that the ones that have been shortlisted, Perfection, A Leopard Skin Hat, and Under the Eye of the Big Bird, so these 3 here, they are probably my favourites out of these 6, so I agree with those choices. But I did also really enjoy reading the Book of Disappearance and Hunchback. Lots to enjoy in this particular list. I would love to know if you have read any, including the ones that I didn't get to, from this year's long list / shortlist. Let me know in a comment down below. Please let me know how you are, what you've been reading. If you enjoy my channel and you would like to consider throwing $1 or £1 in the tip jar over on Patreon, that would be very kind. Support over there allows me to keep creating free content for you on here. I am sending lots of love, and I will see you all very soon. Bye.